guys? Jeremiah here with Hill Shadows. I would say the Hill Shadows podcast. Let's go ahead and say that. Episode 24. And I'm finally rolling. This is my second time going with this. And Ashley is not here with me tonight, so I'm going to do something a little bit different. I don't have a whole lot to go over, but we're going to try something new. As always, if you like any type of content that's related to the paranormal, unexplainable, that type of thing, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you like and hit the notification bell. And if you have an encounter you'd like to share with us, please email us at hillshadowsky@yahoo.com. Now, it's been a crazy week. Ashley and I have been very busy, so much so we're almost just canceled and didn't do anything this week. It's been so hectic. We got even more going on tomorrow, and I am about to give up because I am recording, I guess, right? Yeah, well, let's hope I am. If not, you guys are gonna get the audio because that's just the kind of Sunday I'm having. I usually record this Friday, and it's Sunday. I still don't have it done yet, so bear with me. We're gonna get everything settled. So I wanted to go over some New World Bigfoot encounters, and that's when people were first settling, this country or any other countries, like areas under development. I think a lot of times when people encounter things we don't know exist, is right where society meets the wilderness, So I've been researching some little encounters to go over. There's a couple I want to touch on. One is Ape Canyon, and we'll get into that in a few. Another is Port Chatham, Alaska, and that was basically an area that a port in Alaska that they settled and basically had to abandon to reported activity from what people describe as a Bigfoot-like creature. Now, the first thing I want to get into, Ashley actually did recommend this. Told me to look into this, and that's something I really don't know too much about, so I looked into it a bit, and that's Sasquatch encounters with the veterans who served in the Vietnam War, and they said that they refer to these animals as, I believe, rock apes, and they would encounter them. They would get sent deep in the jungles to look for the Viet Cong, and they would go places where man has never stepped foot. So they would come into contact with these creatures that they described as looking like orangutans, but they had no knowledge that there weren't any. They're not supposed to be orangutans in this part of Asia where they were fighting in the Vietnam War. So they had no way of knowing that for sure. So yeah, they describe these things as orangutan-like creatures, and reportedly the Viet Cong were the only thing they had to worry about in the jungle. Obviously, these creatures could be dangerous when they encountered them, and some were even advised to not feed these creatures because they were told they would get quite angry and aggressive once you ran out of food. So I guess they would be kind of cool as long as you were feeding them, but when the food ran out, it's a different story. So yeah, it was it's a pretty regularly reported thing. There's actually a group on Reddit about veterans of the Vietnam War and their encounters with these animals. So something you might want to look up. But yeah, and we're gonna go over Port Chatham here in just a moment. But they called them Vietnam War rock apes. We got a little bit of background noise going on here, but yeah, one place, before I get into Port Chatham, I want to talk about Ape Canyon, if I can. And I was going to try to look this up on my computer screen, but it seems to be going quite slow. So we'll just do this. So this happened in 1924. And Ape Canyon is a gorge along the edge of the Plains of Abraham on the southeast shoulder of Mount St. Helens. So it's a really interesting area. And this happened in 1924, in which these guys supposedly encountered several of these ape men, which later became known as Ape Canyon. So there's there's a lot of UFO sightings and stuff in this area. So I just want to get into the event. I don't want to really talk too much about the area, but there were some miners on this part of Mount St. Helens that had came out here looking for gold, and they were staying in this cabin. And apparently in 1924 they were assaulted throughout the night and had to basically ward off this group of Sasquatch with their rifles. And they did get out of there the next day. So it was a interesting little story about some miners, and you know, these guys would have been early settlers in the country too, so they would have been walking in places most certainly nobody had been before them. So that's Ape Canyon if you guys want to check that out. And the other thing I wanted to get into is a port in Alaska that was abandoned, and people claim that they were having trouble with Sasquatch. And you know, there are obviously stories that conflict that story, but you know, some say that it was indeed what they call Nantinaq, the people from the area. And you know, there's a lot about this on Wikipedia and stuff, and you can find some facts about it. However, with missing people, they say that if you've heard anything about Port Chatham and Port Alaska, you probably heard that people went missing from this village, and bodies were seen floating back down the river, you know, out into the port where everybody could see them. And you know, due to all this happening, all these people were disappearing and supposedly being attacked by these creatures, and they had to abandon the whole port. They, you know, it's still abandoned to this day. There's actually a pretty popular show on the subject matter. But yeah, it's I don't know how I feel about the show that actually covered it, but yeah, evidently there's a group of killer Bigfoot that are in Port Chatham. However, it is very hard to find factual evidence on the individuals who reportedly were deceased at the hands of such a creature. So, uh, was it in fact that a creature was hunting these people, or was it possibly more likely that for various reasons the port just wasn't, you know, for example, the fishing may not have been that great, right? You have to have pretty good, if you don't have good fishing in your port, you're probably not going to be able to sustain a decent sized population. So other things could play into that as well. But yeah, the locals call the Alaskans, they call it Nantinaq. Um, so let me see what I can find on this factually. I'm just kind of doing it as I go here. So let's see. The history of Port Chatham is remarkable. Uh, Reports of dozens of missing and murdered cannery workers. There's a cannery in the port there, abandoned now clearly. Um, Also, supposedly seen a ghostly white-faced woman screaming and moaning, wearing a lone black dress, levitating and appearing out of the cliffs. Evil forces driving the inhabitants away from their sacred ancestral lands. So, yeah, in the 1920s, stories started popping up around the Kenai Peninsula about strange happenings in Port Chatham, and they had wild tales of a creature said to walk bipedally on 2 feet, haunting the nearby mining camp. And there were reports of trees that were completely ripped up out of the ground, turned upside down, also shoved back into the ground with their roots facing up in there. And I will include some pictures so you guys can check out some of the trees that were. You can still see them there to this day, which is pretty interesting. Now, there was a report of a strange death in 1931. And this guy was a logger by the name of Andrew Camlick. It appeared he had been hit over the head with a large piece of logging equipment, something a man would not have been able to lift and swing. When they found his body, there was blood on the crane, and he was a good 10 feet from it. So it looked like somebody had picked the thing up and bonked the dude over the head with it. So it was pretty strange. In the 40s, the events turned really frightening, and it's said, now this is what I had mentioned before, that over the next 20 years, up to 3 dozen mangled bodies would turn up along the trails and rivers and float down into the bay, as I mentioned. Now, they were said to be completely mutilated and essentially torn to shreds, not resembling anything that a bear or any animal like that would do. Cannery workers refused to come to work one season and were begged to return the next season with promises of people to be there to guard them and protect their camp around the clock. Hunters tracked moose occasionally and would come across giant man-like tracks which would be over 18 inches in length. One reports that while closing in on a moose, there were signs of a struggle where the grass had been matted down, then only the deep tracks of the man-like animal departing toward the high, fog-shrouded mountains, saying, the moose didn't make it out, but the Bigfoot did. And in 1949, it's rumored that the locals grew sick and tired of living in fear of the Nantinaq. So overnight, they fled. They got all this stuff and took off, and everybody there just left behind whatever they couldn't take, right? So what may have caused them to leave? It is indeed a beautiful area. It was the home of their ancestors. Was it rich with sustainable resources? Maybe not. Or maybe there was a serial killer Sasquatch, right? That's our alternative here. So yeah, it's really hard to find specifics on all these bodies that supposedly floated down into the bay. So, but there are some, like the logger guy that was supposedly hit with a piece of equipment. That was pretty interesting, and that you can find some information on that. So it's just one of those things. It's the further society infringes in on nature, we're probably gonna have more strange encounters. We're probably gonna see other things that we didn't know were there before. Things we weren't forced to look at up until now. So yeah, Portlock. Evidently, people claim it's a pretty creepy place. I don't know. Anytime you see anything on it, it seems like as soon as you roll in there, there's one or two abandoned buildings left standing that you'll always see, and seem like people always describe a musty, terrible odor coming from the building. I don't know if maybe Sasquatch sleeps there when nobody else is around, and maybe you can smell his scent in the place. But yeah, interesting stuff. And as I said, just wanted to go over a few of these strange encounters that I've been kind of researching lately, and also thought it was really interesting about the Vietnam War. I'll definitely look more into that and see what I can find out about that. And yeah, sorry I didn't have much for you guys, and like I said, I don't want to really keep this going too long tonight. I almost didn't do it at all, but I didn't want to not do it. So, figured I'd make a little 15-minute video. And again, if you guys have an encounter you want to share with me, please send us an email to hillshadowsky@yahoo.com, and I'll be sure to share it. Um, anyway, that's about all I got tonight. I'm gonna go ahead and get off here. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys next Friday. We will be back as usual. So yeah, we should have it up by the end of next weekend.